Well, hey, welcome again to the Journey. I'm Matt. I'm one of the pastors here. I want to say a special welcome to everyone, especially those joining us online. Maybe you're still stuck in your driveway at home. I don't know. It's been quite a week this week, hasn't it? And we have a real winter this year. It's been I like it. Not so much the cold that we had earlier this week, but it's fun having some winter. But man, this week was kind of crazy, wasn't it? Like I know, I had to snow blow my driveway multiple times in a single day, and I just kind of got to this point where my wife's a teacher and she was at home almost the whole week, and my son was home from school the whole week, and it kind of just felt like my schedule was thrown for a loop, and it was kind of like, what day is it? Like, what am I doing today? What's supposed to be happening? And I know, this week I drank a lot of coffee as well. And so I don't know if you have the coffee this morning, maybe it's hitting you right where you need it today. Get that little caffeine boost, because we all need that, right? And if I was to ask you a question, are you tired? You might say well, yeah, isn't everyone? Of course I'm tired. Everyone's tired, right? Because there's this kind of low-grade exhaustion that is kind of the bar these days. That's kind of the norm, where everyone just kind of feels kind of tired, right? And so you're probably yeah, of course I feel tired. We have this kind of thing of the American dream, and there was the inauguration, everything's going to change this week according to Trump and everything. But it's American dream, and a lot of times is kind of held up to ourselves, but it's a grind to kind of work at it and to keep going and to keep showing up at work or to hustle to try to get ahead or whatever it might be. And it's hard. It's a grind. And especially for this generation and this time of American history, it's really a time of feeling stressed out, burned out, tired, anxious, worn down. In the past couple of weeks, we've been talking about a new beginning in this year of 2025. We've been talking about going back to the way God created things to be. And we've talked about how God created Adam and Eve to participate with Him, and how He calls us to participate in His mission. And we talked about how He is the source of life through the ups and downs. We want to look to Him. And we talked about how we want to increase His presence in our life by being more present with Him. And as you're thinking about all those things, maybe you were yeah, that's great and everything, but I don't know if I can do any of that because I'm tired. I'm worn out. I think that's a reality, because when we live with this low-grade exhaustion, when we're tired all the time, it just brings us to this point where we're just trying to survive, right? It's just kind of what do I got to do to make it through this week? Or even what do I got to do to make it through today? But the problem is I don't know if this happens to you, but when I'm tired, I'm not at my best. When I'm tired, there's times when I've said things and done things and that I don't want to talk about this morning because it's embarrassing, right? You end up saying stuff and I didn't really mean that, but I'm tired, and you just snap or you just react. Do you find yourself there, tired, worn out, where you're just trying to survive? Well, if we want a new beginning this year, we need to get back to how God created life to be. And so we're going to look again at the beginning of the Bible, look at how God created life to be. And I think there's something for us today where we can find real rest. So we began it all in the Bible, in the book of Genesis. If you got a Bible, you might want to look there with me. We've been looking at Genesis 1, 2, and 3 throughout this whole series, and kind of looking at throughout the whole Bible as well. But we've been focusing here. And so if you don't have a Bible, always encourage you to check out the YouVersion Bible app. It's something I use every day. It's kind of the Bible in your pocket then. You always got it with you, so you might want to check that out. But we begin in the first book of the Bible is Genesis, the first chapter, chapter 1, verse 1. It says, "In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth." In Genesis 1, what we see is that God created everything. And in the course of 6 days, He created it. And at the end of every day, and at the end of the sixth day, He said, it's good. And at the end of the sixth day, He said, it's very good. He created us in His image. He created the world and everything in it. And He said, it's all good. And then we pick up the story in chapter 2. Look at this with me. Genesis 2, verse 1. It says this: "Thus the heavens and the earth were completed in all their vast array. And by the seventh day, God had finished the work that He had been doing. So on the seventh day, He rested from all of His work. Then God blessed the seventh day, and He made it holy, because on it He rested from all the work of creating that He had done." So here we see that God creates everything, and then after it's all created, He actually pauses to rest. Even God took a rest. It's interesting, right? And that word rest there is this word Sabbath, is what the word is. And it means to stop working, to cease, to rest. Not only did God rest, though, did you notice the second part of that? He said that he created this pattern of rest. He made this day, the Sabbath day, a day of rest. And he rested as an example for us. And he said he made it holy. And what it means to be holy means to be set apart, to make it a special day. And he did this as really as a gift from us. But if you look throughout all creation, what you see is this is the pattern that God created. In the beginning, God rested from his own work, and then he also created this rhythm of life and rest. We see it not only in what God did, that we're in those verses, but really it's written through all of creation. Like there is a rhythm to like the waves as they come to shore. There is a rhythm in how a bird flies across the sky. There is a rhythm and a pattern written into even creation itself. Like think of the seasons. There's a rhythm and a pattern to that where you have summer when everything is in full bloom and fall, this time of great harvest, and then winter comes and everything rests before spring comes again and new life is formed. The pattern is written even into creation. And God created us in his image, and just like God rested, maybe we need to look for a new way of rest as well. In the Bible, as it continues in the Old Testament, what we see is it follows the Hebrew nation. And what happens is that as they're going, they end up in this time of slavery. Like slavery is this time where there's no rest. It's like you're doing whatever your master tells you to do. But God ends up leading them with Moses out of the slavery, out of the hands of Pharaoh in Egypt. And then as they're beginning to form their society, God gives them these things called the Ten Commandments. And maybe you've seen the movie or something like that, or maybe you know you're familiar with them. And but there was these 10 things that God said, here's some 10 things to do that are important as you're forming your society here. Like there's 10 things. There's important things like don't murder someone, like don't lie, don't covet your neighbor's stuff. It begins with the most important one, to love God above all other things. And in the middle of all of these 10 most important things, we see that God says to remember the Sabbath. It's one of the 10 important things. Here's what it says in Exodus chapter 20. It says this: remember the Sabbath day by keeping it holy, by making it special, setting it apart. 6 days you will labor and do your work, but the seventh day is a Sabbath to the Lord your God. And on it you shall not do any work, neither you, nor your sons or your daughters, nor your male or your female servants, nor animals, nor foreigners residing in your town. For in 6 days the Lord made the heavens and the earth and the sea and all that is in them, but he rested on the seventh day. Therefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and made it holy. So there's 10 things, and out of that, actually, this is the longest. It has the most words to it. It has 3 whole verses to it in this. This is like one of the things that's really highlighted in the 10 Commandments. So maybe it's something important we should pay attention to for ourselves. It's interesting as you look at that, it says this is a time of rest, not only for you, but for everyone that's in your family, even your animals, even people that are visiting you. Like this is important for everything and everyone. And if you look throughout the Old Testament, what they see is they not only observe the Sabbath, but they would have this pattern where every 7 years there would be this year where they would rest their fields, so that the next year when they planted them again, they would be more abundant. It was a pattern that's kind of, again, established by God, this rhythm to make life actually work and happen. And every 7 times 70 years was this year of Jubilee, they call it, when debts would be forgiven and people would be set free from slavery and different things like that. And so we see, again, there was this pattern that they would walk in. And the interesting thing is that it reminds them of the Sabbath and how God Sabbath. Because you might be thinking, maybe like they did back then, I don't need a break. I don't need to rest. Like, I like to work. Working is fun. I enjoy my work. And I got to get those overtime hours on the weekend. And that's when I make a lot of money. And I got to do all these things. And maybe you kind of find yourself like, I don't really need this. But he reminds himself, like, even God took a break. So maybe you need one as well. The interesting thing is in here we see it says to remember the Sabbath in Exodus. And they were kind of revisit these in Deuteronomy, and there it changes a little bit. It says to observe the Sabbath, to not just remember, oh yeah, I should do that, but to actually observe it. Like think about that. Like, how do you observe like holidays or other special days? Like if it's 4th of July, if you're going to observe the 4th of July, you're hopefully going to have the day off of work. You're going to spend time with family. If you're a real American, you'll have a hot dog and a hamburger or something like that. Yeah, and like, so you're having a special meal, you're having a special day, you're not working, you spend time with family, you go to fireworks, you celebrate. Or think of like, how do you observe other holidays? Thanksgiving, what do? You don't work, and then you observe it by getting together with your family, having a feast, slowing down, spending time, maybe watching some football or something like that, and resting. Or Christmas, it's like you observe Christmas by not working, having maybe some special food, all those Christmas cookies that you're still trying to work off now with your resolutions in January. You have a time with family, and you celebrate. It says, in that same way, we should observe the Sabbath, like have a special day when we don't work, or we have time with family to rest, to enjoy life, to feast together, to do some special things. And so he calls us to do the same thing. And so we see throughout the Old Testament that they follow the Sabbath, so much so, though, they create all of these different rules to go along with it, to make sure no one does anything they're not supposed to do. And the Sabbath day ends up becoming something that's more about religious rules than the rest it was intended to be. But then we see Jesus on the scene when the New Testament begins. And look at these words of Jesus, Matthew chapter 11. He says this. He says, "Come to me, all of you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light." You see, Jesus comes and he says, "Let me be your rest. Come to me." Like he comes to give us rest, not just I'm resting by not working, but he comes to give us rest for our souls. If you're feeling, like he says at the beginning of that verse, weary and burdened by life, he says, I have a different source of rest for you. Rest for your souls, for who you really are on the inside. Not just a little break, not just a little vacation, but rest for who you really are. To get rid of the burden, to get rid of the weariness. There's this thing called The Message. It's like a paraphrase of the Bible. And I like how they write it. They kind of rewrite this. It was the author Eugene Peterson rewrote it for his kids. And here's what he says. Here's how he writes these verses. He says, "Are you tired, worn out, burnt out on religion? Come to me. Get away with me, and you'll recover your life. I'll show you how to take a real rest. Walk with me and work with me. Watch how I do it. Learn the unforced rhythms of grace. I won't lay anything heavy or ill-fitting on you. Keep my company, and you will learn to live freely and lightly." Man, I think that's a really interesting perspective on those verses. Are you tired and worn out and burnt out? Jesus says you can discover and rest with him. You can recover your life. You can find real rest. And I like what he says there. He says, walk with me and work with me. We've been talking about that in this series, that we're called to participate with God, to work out this mission with him. We're called to be more present in our relationship with God, to be in his presence like Adam and Eve and walk through the garden with him. So we're called to walk through life. And when we do that, it says we'll know this new rhythm of God's grace in our life. And we can live freely and lightly. Because if you're tired, if you're burdened, it just feels like you're trying to carry it all. You're just busy, busy, busy. It's all on your plate. You have all these plates spinning. You're trying not to let it all fall apart. But he says instead you can live freely and lightly. This is real rest. When we think of rest and not working, we think of like vacation. But like 2 weeks of vacation a year, or maybe you have 3, or maybe you have 4. Like getting away on vacation, it's nice when you're away. But if you just come back to the same grind and the same pattern, it really doesn't bring you the rest that you need. Jesus says, I have come to be your real rest. Jesus is our source of rest. So we want to grow that connection with him, to walk with him, to work with him, to create this new pattern, this new rhythm of his grace in our life. You know, as Jesus, if you look in the New Testament, whenever he talked about the Sabbath, it was usually in conflict with the religious leaders because they made the Sabbath all about the rules. In fact, he responded to them. Here's a verse in Mark chapter 2. He says this, "Then Jesus, he said to them, 'The Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath. So the Son of Man is the Lord even of the Sabbath.'" Jesus calls himself the Lord of the Sabbath multiple times. This also, we see that in Matthew chapter 12. Like he's saying, like, I'm the source of real rest. And he says for them, you're not made, the Sabbath is not man made for the Sabbath. What he was saying is, you're not made to walk in all of these rules that they were setting up in the Sabbath. But instead, he was saying the Sabbath is supposed to be a gift. And I heard there's this pastor author, John Mark Comer, that I was looking at when I was doing some research for today. And he was talking about how, like, when Jesus was talking to the Pharisees, they needed to hear that second part, that man was not made for the Sabbath. You're not made to just follow all these religious things. That's not what's going to really bring you rest, just following all these different religious rules. But for us today, John Mark said that we need to hear kind of that first part, that the Sabbath was made for man. Like, this is a gift for us. Like, we need to get back to how God created things. Like, this is a gift for us to find real rest. And we need to actually take time to slow down and to rest. And that's the gift that God has for us. Because if we do it, we can actually find rest for our souls. We've been looking at kind of the whole Bible. We've been looking at the end and how there's going to be a new heaven and a new earth, and it's almost like the renewal of the Garden of Eden, and we talked about the tree of life there and all those different things. And what we see is in the end that our time in eternity is actually called eternal rest at times. And so in the beginning, God created this rhythm of life and rest that we saw today as we looked in Genesis 2. And in the end, if we put our trust in him, it'll be a place of eternal rest. So we see this pattern of life and rest all throughout the scriptures, from the beginning to the end. And so if that is this theme that's written across the scriptures, if this rhythm of God's grace and his life and rest is written on our hearts and in creation, that means if we want a new beginning in this year, that maybe we need to live with a new rhythm. If we want a new beginning, we need to live in the rhythm that God created us for this time of rest and renewal. We need to observe this ancient practice called the Sabbath. Now, some people would say, we're not under the law of all those religious rules anymore. It's true. But yet, this is how God created us. And we need to get back to this ancient practice so we can find real rest. So we don't have to carry the burdens anymore. We can live freely and lightly. Again, Sabbath, the word Sabbath means to rest or to cease, but it's so much more than just not working. It's about a new lifestyle of looking to God to be our rest and our peace. What that means is like we might say like, oh yeah, well I don't work every weekend. But you know what? We have so much going on in our life. This isn't just your job. This is like work around your house too, right? Like you can have laundry and groceries and snow blowing and all this stuff that we have to do, and we can get so busy with those things every weekend that our life is consumed with work at work and work at home. This is like saying we need a break from all of these things so we can actually slow down and stop. The point isn't just to stop working and to rest. The point is to find renewal, to find rest for our souls, to find this connection with God that can be deeper again. You know, as I'm talking to you guys about this, I'm really talking more to me than I am to you, because this is something that I am not good at. Like, I don't like to sit around and do nothing. I don't like that. It's hard for me to like I was getting a little antsy this week, even like this, I was doing work still and stuff, but I was stuck in the house. It's like, I like to do things, and just sitting around is hard for me. Just resting, shutting everything down, or my mind, my actions, that's hard for me to do. And that's something I've always struggled with. In fact, there was this one time when I was in college, my sophomore year of college, I was going to school, and I had this job, and I was working, And I set up my schedule that year, so I would work Saturday mornings from 5:30 in the morning, and I'd be done sometime between noon and 1. And so that way, Saturday afternoon, Saturday night, if my friends were doing something, I didn't miss out because I was working. I could go hang out with them and keep going, and so and have some fun and not miss out. And so as I was doing that, I was going through that semester of college, and like Friday nights come around, we're hanging out, we're going somewhere, and then you don't get to bed until late, and I was waking up really early in the morning, so I wasn't getting much sleep. And then I would never take a nap on Saturday afternoon because I'd be hanging out with my friends. That was the whole point of that. And so I was just going. And there was one day in November, after doing this for like 3 months, when I went to bed early. I was like, man, I'm just so tired. I went to bed. It was like 10 o'clock. I went to bed. And then the next morning, my alarm was going off, but I never heard it. I never woke up. My roommate got up. He said he was shaking me, and I wouldn't wake up. He turned off my alarm. He went to his classes, went through his whole day, and he came back, and I was still sleeping. And he went to the dining hall at night, and he came back, and he woke me up, and he said, I brought you some dinner. And I had slept from like 10 all the way to dinner time, and I ate something, and I went back to bed, and I slept all the way to the next morning. So I basically slept like 36 hours straight, because I think it was like my body saying, if you're not going to stop, we're going to force you to stop. And that's kind of how it was. And you would think I would learn my lesson, but I really even didn't, because I have a hard time slowing down. But as I've gotten older, like I'm trying to learn this. I know some of you know, like I went through cancer and chemo and stuff. The hardest part of that wasn't like dealing with the sickness. It was like sitting around bored all the time. I was like, this is horrible. I can't do anything. And that was the hardest part. I'm still trying to learn this. Like I can slow down a little bit and not work, but to really like shut my mind down, to really pause everything, man, that's really hard for me. But I know I need to do this, and so it's something I've been working at. So the question is, like, how do we do that? How do we actually Sabbath? What are some ways we can Sabbath? See, what it means is it's not just not working. It's stopping, renewing, worship. That's really the pattern of it. Just like stop. To stop your work, to stop your work around the house, to slow down, to maybe turn off our phones. Because this is the problem, right? We can work all the time because we're always available. We're always email and phones and calls and whatever it might be, we're always available. And so we gotta stop. Shut the thing down, unplug for a little bit. What would happen if you would stop? Maybe you're like, I'm so tired. Maybe you take a nap, right? That'd be like a good thing to take a nap. When you're a kid, you have nap time. When you're adults, nap time's a good thing still. Enjoy it. Take a nap. Again, we said that when we're tired, we're at our worst. So maybe we just need some more sleep. Take a nap, and then maybe you'll wake up and you'll feel a little better. And what happens is that you can actually begin to do some things then that can renew yourself. See, that's the whole point. The point isn't just to stop and to sleep and to nap. The point is, what can I do to renew myself? Because as we're doing these things where we feel renewed, then we begin to have a bigger and better perspective on things. We begin to see beyond just our own busyness. We're not in survival mode anymore. We're not just thinking about my needs that I have to get done. We begin to see a bigger picture of things. And that's when we begin to maybe shift to this idea of being grateful, and we begin to see God in our life. Maybe we can slow down enough and shut down the noise enough where actually we can hear from God. He can renew us. How do we do that, though? That means we got to unplug. That means we can do things like nap. That means we can maybe do things like go for a walk in God's creation. I know, I hear this from guys a lot. They're like, the most religious experience I ever had is being out in the woods hunting. Yeah, think about that. Why is that? Because your phone's shut off, because you're out in the woods, you're in God's creation, you've slowed down, you're just sitting there, quiet. Maybe we need to do more of that. Now, I'm not saying you need to go hunting every weekend, but maybe we need to create a new pattern that's like that, where we actually slow down, quiet ourselves, listen, rest, be in God's creation, go for a walk. It renews us. Or when we think of observing holidays, observing the Sabbath is really not much different. It's a time of feasting, of family. You know, kind of traditionally, Sunday is supposed to be like a Sabbath where you go to church. Maybe you incorporate some scripture and prayer. Or even like tonight, we have discussion and community. Like those are good things to have as part of that day because those are the things that renew us, renew our souls. It's this pattern of stopping, resting, to be renewed, to worship God. See, Sabbath is really all about creating margins in our life. Margins in our life for ourselves, margins in our life for God, margins in our life for others. And this is one thing we said we want to focus on this year is creating margins in our life because it affects every area of our life. See, the idea of Sabbath isn't just like about stopping so I can get some physical rest. This is a physical, emotional, spiritual issue. Because if we don't Sabbath, what happens is that we're stressed out, we're burned out, we end up with a weak immune system, we have restless sleep, there's distance in our relationship with God and others, and so we want to create these patterns, this pattern of rest in our life because it's physically, emotionally, and spiritually going to affect us. So as we're thinking about creating margins, I want to let you know, too, we are doing a class about this. If you're like me and like, I'm not good at this, we have a class coming up in a few weeks. And maybe this is something, maybe you need to scan that QR code right now so you can sign up for that and participate with that because it will give us some practical ideas of how to do that. As we think about this Sabbath idea, maybe you're like, I would love to do that, but I just don't know if I can squeeze that in. And start small. Maybe you can't do a whole day. Like traditionally, Sunday has been kind of like a Sabbath day. It used to be where you'd go to church and you'd go home and have a family dinner, and it was kind of a time of rest and family and feasting together. But maybe you're like, I can't do a whole day. Or I know like for me, like I'm working here today. I have lots of things to do. Sunday's not a restful day for me. So I tried to shut it down Friday night into Saturday. And so maybe you need to find a time. Maybe you work on the weekends and you're watching this later online and stuff like that. Maybe it's a different time for you. But we have to have time to rest, to renew ourselves. It'll shift our perspective. We'll find rest for our souls. So we got to figure out a time to do that. And maybe it can't be a whole day. Maybe it's going to be like, I'm going to take a morning. I'm going to unplug. I'm not going to do any chores. I'm not going to do any work. I need to unplug, and I'm going to take this time. So maybe you start with like a morning, or maybe you start with half a day, or whatever it might be for you. But let's just start to build this practice in our life. I was telling you about John Mark Comer as I was researching this. He said this. I just want to give you this one more thought. He said this: if we are willing to create this new pattern in our life of rest, what happens is that we go from restlessness to restfulness, from a life of hurry to a life with margin, to a life where we feel burnt out to a life and a pattern that's sustainable, from a noisy life to a life of quiet and calm, from a distracted life to a life with clarity, from anxiousness to peace, from grasping at life to feeling gratitude, and from control to trust. This really comes back to like Adam and Eve. Adam and Eve, they took a hold of that fruit that God said, don't eat of this tree, and they were taking life into their own hands. And it's really no different from us. Can we trust God that I don't have to do it all myself? Can I trust him to be my provider? Can I trust him to be my portion, the one that can fulfill my life? Can I trust him through it all? This is really what the idea of Sabbath is about, trusting him. So Sabbath, this idea of rest, it might feel weird to you. It goes against all of society, but we don't want to be a slave anymore to that pattern. Let's live a life that's set free because we've created a new pattern of rest as God created it to be in the beginning. Let's do this right now. I'm going to ask you just to close your eyes with me right now. As we do this, we're going to take a moment of silence, and silence is something that's maybe weird for us. Let's just pause right now and just quiet our hearts, quiet our minds, and just rest. As we rest, let's shift to our breathing. Let's breathe in a deep breath and breathe out. As we breathe in, we pray, God, be my rest. As we breathe out, you say, here's all my stress. Breathe in, God, be my rest. Breathe out, here's all my stress. I'll cast my cares on you. Breathe in.